What's up, world? You like the whiteboard? Yeah, I brought it out, right? Because now we're starting the beginning gardening series. And it's a lot easier for me to give you the information like this. So, today we're talking about the different tiers of vegetables and why I believe new gardeners or people just starting off in gardening don't necessarily need to hop into the heart of vegetables. They can start right here in tier 1. So let's get to it. Tier 1 includes things like beans, peas, lettuce, leafy greens. Leafy greens include chard, collards, mustard greens, kale, and spinach. Chives, radishes, onions, and herbs. Okay? I have these as tier 1 or the beginner vegetables or my first time gardening and growing vegetables because a few different reasons. One, they have less upkeep than the other ones. Two, you don't necessarily need to know about all of the diseases and pests when it comes to gardening in this category right here. Three, they require less fertilizer than the other two categories. And four, hey man, you can kind of just throw the seeds in, throw a little bit of compost on top, water it, and you're good to go, right? The only exception to this when we get to leafy greens, I'm talking about spinach. I find spinach kind of hard to start directly from seed for beginners, right? Because when it comes to spinach, you need ideal conditions. You need cool but not cold. You need moist but not wet conditions in the soil to start it, all right? A lot of these vegetables, maybe minus the onions and the herbs, you can start directly from seeds right in your bed or container, which makes them, to me, a good way to start. That's not to say that you can't start these other vegetables directly from seeds in your garden. Again, to me, these are just the easier ones to start with when you're a beginner gardener. When we go to tier 2, we have cucumbers, squash, broccoli, carrots, and beets. Now in this tier, these plants are going to take up more space than tier 1, and they're going to have more diseases and more pests that are bothering them or could bother them than the ones you find in tier 1. So I feel like your first season, when you first get started gardening, you start over here. Your next season, you work your way to tier 2. The following season, you work your way to tier 3. I just think it's kind of silly, straight to the hardest things to grow. It could be discouraging, right? And I think everybody should be gardening. So I don't think that we should do anything or start with harder crops to grow, right? I think we should do what we can do where we borderline know as long as we drop these in good fertile soil, proper spacing, water them, and they have enough sun, these are gonna produce, especially herbs and chives. Back to tier 2. These are in tier 2 because 1, they take up more space than tier 1. 2, they're going to require more fertilizer than tier 1. And when I say fertilizer, I don't mean you have to go out and buy any sort of organic fertilizer. I just mean they need to be planted in more fertile ground than tier 1 does. And 3, they're going to have a lot more pests and diseases that you have to deal with. This is where you get introduced to the powdery mildews and the squash vine borers and things of that nature. And now we get over here to tier 3. These are, hey, I've been gardening for a little while. I can grow lettuce and leafy greens without a problem. I got cucumbers. I understand that cucumbers are gonna sprawl and wanna go everywhere. I learned how to prune them to keep them manageable. And now I'm ready to really step in there and get started. Tier 3 is where I have the big fruiting plants. The tomatoes, pumpkins, watermelons, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, and peppers. This is where you have the plants that, man, there's a lot of diseases and a lot of things that can go wrong with tier 3. Okay, this is where you get your soil-borne fungus diseases. This is where you have a plethora of insects and bugs trying to get your crop and stop you from having a good harvest. This is even where you have to deal with the birds, right? Because the birds are coming after your tomatoes and the squirrels. So these in tier 3, they're gonna take more fertilizer, even more applications of fertilizer than anything in tier 1 and tier 2. They're gonna take a lot more space in your garden than anything in tier 1 and tier 2, with the exception of maybe peppers, okay? But also in tier 3, we need to learn about proper staking of the plants, right? We also need to learn about how to support the fruits on pumpkins and watermelons to keep them up off of the ground. With Brussels sprouts, we have to learn that you have to plant them at the ideal time. You have to make sure that it gets cold enough for them to actually produce. With cauliflower, you have to make sure that, all right, with cauliflower, I feel like you either need to start the seeds yourself or you just have to get them when they first land at the nursery. Because with cauliflower, if they stay in their little transplant containers too long, when you go to drop them in the ground, they will never actually form heads. Also, they have to be planted at the right time. You get cauliflower in too late and it's too hot, you won't ever actually get a real head, an actual head on the cauliflower. And with peppers, there's just a lot of diseases and a lot of problems. Now, after we go through these tiers, we get down here to the perennials. I have perennials between tier 1 and tier 2, right? You have your asparagus, your artichokes, rhubarb, horseradish, and berries. I have these between tier 1 and tier 2 because once you get them started, they're relatively low maintenance, right? You keep your bed weeded, you add mulch, you add compost, and then you're good with these. The catch with these is that they require a different soil pH than everything else. Most things in tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, they just need a soil pH between 6 and 7 and they will do just fine. But when we get down here into the perennials, some of these things need more acidic soil in the 5 range, so you're gonna have to learn about that. That's why I don't have them right here in tier 1. Also, these perennials, they're not necessarily in tier 1 because, you have to plant them at the proper depth, right? If you get asparagus crowns and you plant them too shallow or too deep, then you're just not gonna have a good flourishing asparagus bed, right? So like I said, that's why I have the perennials in between tier 1 and tier 2. So again, to recap, whenever you're starting off with a garden, I personally don't think you should just go head first, jump in with the tomatoes and the watermelon. I think just get started, man. Just come over here, get a container. You have a little 4x4 bed or whatever size your bed is. Start with things that will help you be successful from the beginning. You don't really want to get discouraged, right? Especially if you're new to gardening, you don't want to plant something and not have it produce or have to deal with diseases, and then that could get you discouraged and turn you away from gardening. And there's a whole lot of health benefits when it comes to gardening, and I think that you will, look man, you'll be better off just starting here. It's not a sprint when it comes to gardening. We're picking up skills that we grow and build upon every season. So anyway, here you go. The first video in the beginning gardening series, talking about the tiers of vegetables, even touched on perennials. I hope this was informative. If you want more information about each specific vegetable, you can shoot over to the blog, click the link in the bio, or you can go to bigcitygardener.com. Hopefully, this information helped, and it will help you just get out in the garden, man, get your hands dirty, and just grow it. Thanks.